Welcome back.
Good day to you, beautiful people.
It's been another week. Here we are on a Thursday morning talking about the time between the resurrection and the day of Pentecost, the time that Jesus spent so much time with his disciples after he was risen from the dead, from the grave on. And so, we want to talk about some of those stories that happened in that period, because in those stories are the foundation, the building blocks of the church, the working of resurrection. As resurrection has worked through Jesus, it's the working of resurrection into the disciples, and they're experiencing that power. So we want to talk about that with you. For the Lloydminster folks that are joining us, you were probably privileged, just as we were, to be a part of a service where David and Jean McGrew did a great message out of John chapter 21.
Yeah.
And they talked about how this conversation between Jesus and Peter, where Peter is a broken man, he's busted up over denying Jesus, and Jesus says to him, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "I love you." And, "Do you love me?" "I love you." And David talked about the fact that when Jesus said that to Peter, he used the word for love here that in the Greek New Testament. It's the word agape. That love that we often ascribe to God. It's a perfect love. It's a self-sacrificing love. It's a chosen love. It's not a love that is based on feelings, but something greater. Peter's response is, "I love you." And it's not the word agape. It's the word phileo, which is a word that we often attribute to, friendship or brotherly love and natural affection, but it's not the same. So what's the hesitancy? What's the disconnect there? They preached a great message on it, so we want to build on that foundation and just keep going with that. So I want to read you this out of John chapter 21. When they finished breakfast, this is John 21:15. Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Then feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said, "Well, then tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to Jesus, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. You know my heart. You've known everything. You know me better than I know myself." Then Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." To understand this, we probably need to go back to the initial conversation that happens the night Jesus is betrayed, the night of his arrest, the night where Peter is broken, where Peter's self-confidence is wrecked, where everything seems to fall apart. Because Jesus said to him, in fact, he said to all of his disciples, "You will all fall away," because the scripture says, "Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter." That's in Mark 14. And he's quoting from the Old Testament. And Peter says something that is just not a team player quote, but he goes, "If they all fall away, I'll still follow you," right? Like, if these losers leave you, I'm sticking with you. First of all, Jesus, coach, you just told everybody you're all going to fail. You'll all fall away. We're losing this game, boys. Just get used to it. We're going to win the season, but you're losing this game. And I'm sure that would have hurt. And then it must have hurt when Peter's like, "Well, yeah, they'll fail you, but not me." And Jesus says to him, "Truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. In Luke 22, it tells us that Jesus said, "Simon, Simon," he uses his birth name, Shimon, which means reed, rather than his given name by Jesus, Peter, which means rock. He says, "Simon, Simon." And I imagine that's from a place of intimacy. A reed is much more flimsy than a rock, and maybe there's something to that, but maybe there's something to the fact that Jesus is talking to Peter by his birth name, as a father to a child. He says, "Simon, Simon, I'm telling you that Satan has desired to sift you all." And there's a plural word for you, like you guys, like wheat. "But I've prayed for you," singular, you, Peter, "that your faith would not fail." He doesn't say that your love or your willpower wouldn't fail or your strength wouldn't fail. It's your faith. Because faith is not based on what you have. It's based on what he has, right? Yes. It's not based on my love for you. It's based on your love for me. He says, "I'll pray that your faith won't fail." And then he says this. He's given them the ultimate, you're going to fail. But then he says, "And when you've returned." What a statement. You're not going to stay a failure. You're not going to stay in the ditch. When you come back, strengthen your brothers. He gives them a mission. And so right in this conversation, there's something interesting. Jesus is making them breakfast on the shore when this is all happening. After his resurrection, they've gone fishing. And they're gone back to what they know. They're disillusioned. They're broken. Even after hearing the news that Jesus was alive. They don't know what to do. Jesus had to tell those that first carried the message of his resurrection, he had to tell them, go and tell my disciples and Peter. Something's different. Peter is broken. He's not the same man he was. And John actually uses a word here that he only uses one other place. It's only one other place in the Bible it's used, and it's the word charcoal fire. I think John is the kind of writer where he just leaves little breadcrumbs, little clues, and he's very meticulous about the words he uses. And the only other time we see charcoal fire mentioned in the Bible is the fire that over which Peter denied Jesus. Peter was warming himself by this charcoal fire, and he said, I don't know him. I swear I don't know him. Jesus brings Peter back to that place of denial and rebuilds him brick by brick.
Oh, I love that.
Peter denies him 3 times, so Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? And every time he says, do you love me? Even with Peter's hesitancy, Jesus responds with mission. He responds with commission. He responds with a ministry. He doesn't say, Peter, then prove it. He doesn't say, Peter, then don't fail me again. He says, Peter, feed my sheep. Pastor my flock. Pastor my lambs. At the end of his life, Peter used that language all the time. If you read his letters when he was an old man, first of all, he says, let me tell you about your faith. When everything tests you, when the trials come, and they will come, he says your faith will remain like gold purified. It'll be more precious than gold. It'll still be there. It'll prove to be sincere. And then he says, I am your fellow shepherd. He says, elders, shepherd the flock. He uses that term because he never let it go. Once Jesus gave it to him, he never let it go again. Yeah. Jesus finishes the conversation by saying, Peter, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you don't want to go. This was to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. After saying this, he said to him, follow me. Jesus rightfully predicted what would happen. The history tells us that Peter was crucified. Under the persecution by Nero, Peter was crucified by the Romans. And church history tells us that Peter asked, can you crucify me upside down? Because I'm not worthy to die the same way as Jesus. We don't know if the Romans let him have his request or not, but we know that he asked. And I think rather than thinking Jesus is trying to scare Peter, I think he's assuring Peter, Peter, when you're an old man, you'll still be with me. You won't fail me. You'll still be sticking by me as an old man. And you'll go even to death. Remember how you said you would die for me and you didn't? You will. You'll stick with me all the way to the end, Peter. What a statement of faith. And he over the charcoal fire, where all the sense memories are coming back, the smell of it must have brought back the memories of Peter's failure. Yes. And Jesus doesn't bring him back to the place of failure. He brings him back to that place of the love that I have for you is enough. I've prayed for you that you would not go, that your faith wouldn't fail. And now you're back. Now it's time to carry out your ministry.
Isn't that such a beautiful picture?
Yeah.
I love that it was brought back to that. And I feel so much in the spirit that there is so much of a sense of a do-over, of maybe an example of God holding out a platter to us. And it's all laid out there for us to just partake, for us to grab and to do this with God. And I have such a soft spot in my heart for Peter. I love how real these stories are, how they just jump off the page. And I also see so much of myself in Peter too. It is so helpful reading how real these experiences were and how I've had many moments, not exactly, but many moments like Peter. And how true is that for all of us? And how Jesus never left, that God never leaves us, that he is always there with us, ready to just take us into what he has. So I do so much sense that in the spirit that it's like what God maybe wanted to do a while back in your individual life, in our individual lives, that it's a time again of, are we ready yet? Right. Are you ready for what I have for you? And it is seriously a beautiful picture. Wow. It's delicious to me.
It's delicious. Like that fish that Jesus, listen, who would you rather have fix breakfast for you? the best chef in the world or Jesus himself. I'm sure he would made a mean fish. I think he did a good job cooking that fish, but the fish isn't the point. The point is that conversation.
Yeah.
Will you be willing, like Pastor Tia said, will you be willing to have that conversation with Jesus? If you feel like you've backslid, if you feel like you've broken faith, if you feel like you've let go and you haven't lived up to what God wanted of you or asked of you, listen, he's not done. You're still breathing. You're still here.
Yeah.
And it's time to come back. But don't just come back and say, well, at one point I had hopes that I'd be used by God, but now best I can do is just, love him and stick with him. No.
He's ready to do the full thing.
That's right. He's going to restore you. So let's take that to heart. God bless you. We love you very much. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.